Your go-to sports talk from your own backyard. This is SS Tampa Bay.
How's everyone doing on this fine Mother's Day? I'm Harrison Smadjevitz alongside my good friend Zach Seifter. Zach, happy Mother's Day to you.
Happy Mother's Day. I mean, I'm not a mother. I'm not there yet. But, maybe I'll be celebrating this for myself one day, so we'll see.
Yes, honestly, I think you'll make an excellent mother.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, buddy. But seriously, to all the mothers out there that do a great job, I know I love my mom very much, and I'm sure you love your mom too. Very important. They're great people, and they take care of us, and we love them. So happy Mother's Day to all the great mothers out there.
Yeah, definitely. Had a pretty good Mother's Day so far. Made her waffles. She liked them a lot. Belgian style.
Yeah, we did bagels and hash browns in my house.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Mm-hmm. It was great.
Now, one thing we want to do here on SS Tampa Bay Sports Podcast today is, just before we get onto the regular topics we normally do, we thought we'd talk about our favorite sports Mother's Day moments, because as you know, we come from mothers who like sports, so we have some memories.
Not necessarily the best Mother's Day moment with sports, but maybe like the best sports moment with our moms, personally.
Yeah, because as Rays fans, that didn't work out so well.
I have a couple, but I'll let you kick it off, Harrison.
Well, I would say for me, it's the fact that my mom and I had an opening day tradition for about 5 years. We started around 2013, and it went on until I graduated high school in 2017. We actually were going to start the tradition over again this year, but then the coronavirus canceled the start of the season, basically.
I have a couple. Believe it or not, my mom took me to my first ever Bucs game, which my dad is like the crazed Bucs fan. My mom's more of a hockey fan, but she likes football. She took me to my first ever Bucs game when I was 3 years old. So my birthday is is August 25th, which is typically year in, year out the same time that the NFL preseason's going on. And when I was growing up, usually my parents would take me to like a Bucs preseason home game or something like that for my birthday and grab some friends. But when I was 3 years old, my mom took me to my first Bucs game. And another one, this is a hockey one. My mom and I, when the Lightning won the Stanley Cup, we were there for the finals, Game 5, when they lost.
No way.
They lost 3-2 in overtime, but they ended up winning the series and winning the cup, so it was fine. But we were there, Tampa and Calgary, Game 5, which was pretty wild just to be at a cup final.
That is pretty cool, and that reminds me of another memory. My mom took me to my first Rays playoff game back in 2011. It was Game 3 of the American League Division Series against the Texas Rangers. The Rays won the first game, Rangers won the second. I remember Desmond Jennings hit 2 home runs. We had a 1-0 lead going into the 6th, and then playoff David Price happened, and we lost 4-3.
Playoff David Price, man, that was frustrating. He finally got over those demons a little bit with the Sox, and they won a World Series. But playoff David Price for the longest time, man. Yeesh.
And I mean, especially against the Texas Rangers. He finally redeemed himself in Game 163, but then he went right back to his normal self and got blown up by the Red Sox in Game 2 of that ALDS.
Texas was just frustrating. The Rays went and won the division in 2010, and then they go and lose to Texas in the ALDS. 2011, they're right back. They come back from 9.5 games down to the Sox in September. You have the Game 162 in 2011 with Evan Longoria. The comeback from 7-0 against the Yankees. And what do you know? They go and lose to Texas again, first round, and they're knocked out. So Texas, the Rangers will always, I guess you could say, not be favorable in the eyes of Zach. I'm never going to ever like Texas Rangers just from those 2 postseasons alone.
I can't say I will either, Zach. To be honest,
I was thrilled when they lost to the Cardinals in the World Series. David
that
Cruz
was
is my
awesome.
man.
David, I remember that moment like it was 10 minutes ago. Not even yesterday. Like, I just finished watching the game. You mind if I tell it quickly just to get it out of the way?
Go nuts.
All right,
It's going to kill you if you don't.
Yes, of course. And it will. So I'm watching it on the television in my room with my dad. And I guess we'll save more dad stories for Father's Day, but we're already talking about this one. Down to the last strike. I'm hoping the Rangers will lose, and I think you were too. And I'm thinking, oh man, the Cardinals came back from 8.5 games behind the Braves, and they're going to go down to their final strike. And then David Freese hits it over Nelson Cruz's head, and we're thinking, oh my God, did that just happen? Like, that was just something I'd never seen before. Some last-second comeback like that. Just because, when you're 13 years old, you haven't seen a lot of big sporting events in your life just yet.
Right. Well, I remember my personal experience with it. I was sitting in my sister's room. She had the big TV, upstairs. Me and my little brother had the small ones, but she had the big one. She let me watch the game on her giant TV. And I was just sitting there. I watch, and I see David Freese in an extra innings hit the solo shot to beat Texas. And my first thought was, Texas, eat it. That was my first. That was just me. But it felt nice to be avenged a little bit by the Cardinals. I was very appreciative of David Freese. That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah, it was just really nice to have of two of the teams that came back to make the playoffs that year. One of them at least won the World Series. I thought that was at least really nice. If the Rays couldn't do it, I was very happy the Cardinals could.
I just didn't want Texas to. That was me.
Oh yeah, same
I'm
here.
salty. I am a petty person. Not gonna lie. If you beat my teams, I'm that person that's like, you know what? I hate you. You beat us. I hope you lose. I'm very Michael Thomas that way. I don't know if you saw what happened on Twitter back in January after the Saints lost once again to the Vikings in the playoffs. They lost in the wild card round. The next week, Minnesota went over to San Francisco and got blown out in the divisional round. Not blown out, but they got beat pretty handily. And Michael Thomas went on Twitter. He's like, that's what y'all get. And everyone's like, that's what they get for beating you? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I kind of understand that, though.
I get
petty
it.
also.
I can be petty too. I remember, I'm not going to lie, and I'm going to be very honest here. It sounds blasphemous, but in 2009, because the Phillies beat the Rays in the World Series, I was happy the Yankees won. Just because it was the Phillies. I have to be honest here. I would never be okay with it if it wasn't for that 1 year. I made an exception. We'll never make it again. The only time I would never make an exception, though, is Boston. The Red Sox have been in the playoffs or in the World Series. I've been like, whoever's playing them, no. They got.
Don't get me wrong. I feel a hatred in my heart for Philadelphia sports teams just because of their history with Tampa a little bit. They took us out. The Eagles took us out in 2001. And then, in beautiful Rondé Barber fashion, he picked six, Donovan McNabb, 92 yards in the NFC Championship game, closed down the vet. The greatest moment in Tampa Bay sports history. I loved it. Hate the Flyers. En route to our only cup, we beat them in 7 in the conference final. I wanted it to be a clean sweep of Philadelphia sports teams by beating them in the World Series. But that en route to championships, but that didn't happen. So there's a part of me that just doesn't like the city of Philadelphia. And I'm not going to lie, when I watched that World Series between the Yankees and the Phillies, I just kind of threw my hands up and said, well, this is a lose-lose. I'm not going to watch it. I can't cheer for either of them.
I think for me also it was a different time. I was 11. I think now at 21, it would be a little more difficult.
I just grew up hating Philly. I hated Philly.
Oh, I can't stand the Phillies to this day. Every time they collapse, I can't help but laugh. Just because it's like, that's what you get. You won your World Series, you're good. You're done. You win one every 30 years. Maybe this time it'll be 50, God willing.
I'll say this. I don't hate the Eagles now like I used to. Like when I was a kid, when I saw those stinking little wings on the side of the helmets and stuff like that, I just immediately knew that's who I'm rooting against because they had a history with the Bucs. We hated the Eagles. My dad hated the Eagles, so he told me, he's like, you see that team over there? You see Donovan McNabb? We hate them. I'm like, yeah, we hate them. I hate them. And so it was I grew up hating Philly. And it's not like Tampa and Philly have like a bitter rivalry. I mean, it was a little more early 2000s.
Philly fans definitely hate us too. They definitely hate us too.
Oh, for all the times that I've seen videos of Rondé Barber, and I'll scroll the pick six, and I'll scroll down to the comments on like a video, and I'll see Eagles fans like, "Oh, I stopped believing in God the day that Rondé Barber closed down the vet," or "I'll always hate Rondé Barber. F Rondé Barber. He's a piece of garbage. That guy sucks. He ruined sports for me." Yada yada yada. Philadelphia fans hate Rondé Barber. I don't know if they hate the Bucs, but they hate Rondé Barber.
They hate Rondé Barber. My roommate.
I love Rondé. What a great guy.
One of my friends and my old roommates, if you mentioned Rondé Barber, and you've met the guy too, if you say Rondé Barber, the first thing he'll just flat say is, "I hate Rondé Barber."
Oh,
He doesn't hate the Bucs. He hates Rondé Barber. So I
they
think
hate Rondé
there's
Barber.
truth to that.
Which, I had the pleasure of when I was interning last year with JoeBucksFan.com, and I was there for Rondé's Ring of Honor induction press conference. I had the pleasure, shaking his hand and saying hi to him real quick. Seems like a great guy. He gave me no reason not to think that he's the same guy who I loved as a child watching him dominate on those Tampa Bay defenses. So I love Rondé. Zero reason to hate Rondé, especially considering he did deliver us to that NFC Championship with not only a great final play with that pick six, but overall just an incredible game that he played. I think he had a sack, maybe like 2 forced fumbles or something, at least a sack and a strip. So Rondé played a great game, and Philly hates him for it, and I love it.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to my cousin about it. He was probably a teenager closer to our age when the Bucs were going to the Super Bowl. He said that NFC Championship was more the Super Bowl than the actual Super Bowl because they had to get past the Eagles finally after several years. And then Oakland was just a weak opponent. They blew out. The defense scored like 3 touchdowns.
Well, that does seem to be the scenario with several teams on several different occasions. I mean, you think about Peyton Manning and all those years with the Colts. I would say that 2006 AFC Championship game against New England, where he finally overcame Tom Brady and the Pats, was more the Super Bowl than them beating the Bears in the Super Bowl. I don't know if you've been watching The Last Dance.
Oh, I have.
About the
I'm a
98
little
Bulls.
behind. I'm a little behind. I'm on episode 4, even though there's been almost 8 out. But
Well, in the documentary series, they're talking about how the '91 Bulls finally overcame the Pistons, who had
I
beaten them
did
the
see
2 years
that
prior in the
episode.
conference final. That was more, I would say, the finals for them than the finals.
I
Sometimes you do
agree.
have to overcome that one team that's been the pain in the butt that you can't get past, and that's more important than the actual championship game or championship series. So, in this scenario, I would say beating Philly was definitely much bigger for this team than for the Bucs at that point in time than beating the Raiders. And I don't think you're going to find many other Bucs fans who will disagree with that. I mean, Philly have been a thorn in our side for years. They knocked us out of the playoffs the 2 years prior, and to finally overcome them and close down the Vet. Last game in Veterans Stadium, they shut them up, send them home. I mean, Philly before the game was sitting there booking their flights to San Diego for the Super Bowl. They were already claiming victory because, Tampa can't beat us. They can't play in the cold. It's like 30
Oh, I
degrees out,
hate
yada,
that
yada,
can't
yada.
play in the cold argument. Let me tell you. And I mean, it was kind of reinforced when the Rays won the World Series a bit, just for
It
Tampa
was
Bay
accurate at
in
that point,
general.
though.
But it's irritating,
Well,
especially when they end up winning.
here's the issue, though. The Bucs in their prior 26, I mean, they won the Super Bowl in their 27th season, but prior to that game in Philadelphia, um, they had never. No, wait, they did. In Week 17 of that 2002 season, up until then had never won a game. I want to say where the temperature was below 40 degrees, and then they finally did Week 17 against Chicago of that 2002 season. I think they shut them out 15-0. But okay, they're like, well, we've done it once, and but Tampa's only done it once, and it was against a Chicago team that wasn't very good that year. So they go into Philadelphia. They're like they've won once in their entire franchise history in a game where the temperature is below 40 degrees. We've had their number. We got this. We're going to the Super Bowl. And Rondé Barber shut him up, and it was a beautiful thing.
And while we're still on the topic of the Bucs, we should probably get on what's on everyone's mind now, and that's the new schedule for the 2020 season.
The Bucs finally got a favorable schedule. It's about freaking time. All right, let's just talk about the last 3 years alone. Are you ready for this? The last 3 years alone. 2017. The Bucs, I want to say it was on 2 separate occasions, had 3-game road trips. I could be wrong. I don't remember it tick for tack. I do remember a hurricane knocking out Week 1 against Miami. So the Bucs had to play 16 straight games without a bye because Week 1 was technically their bye week because Miami and Tampa had the same bye week, Week 11, and that's where they placed the game. So the Bucs played 16 straight games. All right. Not necessarily the schedule maker's fault. although I don't think it was a very favorable schedule. But I digress. We move on. 2018, Bucs coming off a 5-11 season. You know how they open up the year with the Jameis Winston suspension? New Orleans, defending NFC South champs,
It's
on the
massive.
road, week 1. Week 2 at home, Philadelphia, reigning Super Bowl champs. Week 3, Pittsburgh, it was at home, but reigning AFC North champs had just been in the playoffs, the divisional round the year before, almost reached the AFC Championship game. And everyone's just sitting there like, this team's going to start off 0-3. I remember seeing that schedule and being like, well, the season's over. We're going to start off 0-3. We have no Jameis Winston. It's Fitzpatrick. Granted, the Bucs started the year 2-1. With the Fitz magic and everything, everyone remembers that, and it was a fun time. But the season fell apart after that. But I mean,
They dropped 7 games in a row after that. I think at one point they were 2-7, 3-9 at one point that year.
But it was exciting at first. But on paper, looking at that schedule to start, everyone's like, this team's going to start off 0-3. And then last year, 2019 was the worst of them all. 49 straight days between games at Raymond James Stadium. 5 road games. 4 road games. A game in London and a bye week, all sandwiched in between there. They had 2 okay, so week 3 they played the Giants. Week 4 and week 5, back-to-back games at Los Angeles and at New Orleans. Week 6, technically a home game, but it's in London, so it's not really a home game. It's a neutral site game. Team's got to go to the West Coast, back to New Orleans, across the pond to London. They come back for their bye week, week 7. Got to go to Tennessee, then back to the West Coast to Seattle, all before coming home week 10. 7 weeks without a home game. This team, year after year, has been screwed over on their schedule, and they finally get a favorable one. And there's one reason why, and his name is Tom Brady.
Yeah, if you look at the schedule, Zach, it only happens two times maybe. You get back-to-back road games, and then you get a bunch of games at home. You never go 3 consecutive weeks without a Bucs home game at Raymond James Stadium. Even if the opponents aren't necessarily easy. I mean, it's basically playing both of the Bucs divisions. It's the South and the Central mushed together with some AFC teams this year.
Well, when you look at the first 8 weeks, listen. We don't know who's going to be good yet. We don't know what's going to happen. Injuries will happen. Teams will either not meet expectations or they'll exceed expectations. We don't know what will happen in the midst of the NFL season. And that's what makes the NFL beautiful. But when you look at it on paper, the first 8 weeks, the only games where the Bucs could seriously be considered remotely underdogs is New Orleans, week 1, and Green Bay, week 6. Besides that, Carolina, in the middle of a rebuild, very winnable game, at home opener, week 2. Week 3, at Denver. They were okay last year. They went 7-9. They weren't great. Drew Lock started 5 games, and he looked, like he can play a little bit. So you don't know. And they really added some talent at the receiver position this year to go with Cortland Sutton. They got Jerry Jeudy, and they added some speed and some talent at receiver. So we'll see. And that defense isn't nothing to scoff at either. And Brady has had his troubles in Denver. So I'm not, you can't mark it as a win, but it's a winnable game. Denver's not exactly a powerhouse. You can go. I could foresee the Bucs going into Denver and winning. Week 4 at home. They're playing a Chargers team that was 5-11 last year. That's probably going to be starting a rookie quarterback. They have some talent on defense. Derwin James, Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram. They got some talent. But it's at home, on paper, winnable game. Week 5 at Chicago. Winnable game. It's a short week. It's on the road, I understand, and Chicago's got a good defense. But Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles, they don't even know who their quarterback's going to be yet. That offense last year was abysmal. On paper, winnable game. Week 6, Green Bay at home. All right, Green Bay was in the NFC Championship game last year. They went 13-3. It's Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. I expect them to regress a bit this year. I do think they're a little overrated. They're a very good team, but I don't think they're a 13-3 team again. I think they'll definitely compete for that NFC North Championship and be a good team. But at home, I could see the Bucs winning that game. I wouldn't necessarily say they're favored or they're definitely going to win, but I think Green Bay is more beatable than I say they were last year. I think they're a beatable team, but I could definitely see the Bucs losing that game. Week 7 at Vegas, another team that was 7-9 last year. We don't know how much longer Derek Carr's got. We don't know if Mariota's going to be thrown in there by Gruden. They added some receivers. Their defense doesn't really scare anyone. Very winnable game. Then Week 8 at the Giants. The Bucs, obviously, we remember last year's Giants game. Oy vey. That was the ultimate punch to the gut I've ever probably experienced. But again, not a very good team on either side of the ball. The Giants, another winnable game. The Bucs first half of the season, all filled with winnable games. They've gotten a favorable. They have the chance to put themselves in a position to start the season fast. Now you may talk.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Listen, I think the Bucs have a pretty fair schedule too. I don't know if you saw what I sent out. I sent what is the best case scenario for the Bucs season and what's potentially the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And,
I've seen a lot of those where, a lot of people think that this team's floor is 9-7. And, that's a hell of a floor. That's 9-7 in the right season is definitely good enough for a wild card berth, especially with an extra playoff team in each conference now.
Yeah, and the reason I put the floor is 9-7 is because this team should have gone 9-7 last year if it wasn't for Jameis Winston completely imploding the last 2 weeks of the season.
I mean, there was definitely some other factors. I mean, if Matt Gay doesn't sit there and shank his field goals Week 3 against the Giants and Week 17 against the Falcons, then they win those 2 games. If Jameis doesn't throw away the games against Houston and Atlanta, then they win those games. There were a lot of different factors, but Jameis was a big one. A big one.
And now that you think about it, with Tom Brady coming in, yeah, he doesn't throw as many touchdowns as Winston at this point, but
he's going to cut the interceptions way down.
22 less interceptions last year than Jameis Winston. That's more than 1 less interception per game.
Yeah.
I would kind of want to set up a random setup in which you remove interceptions from each game randomly and see what the outcome of the score is for all of them, seeing what the Bucs record would have been without those 22 interceptions. And I know not all of them were Jameis's fault, but a lot of them were.
Yeah.
And if you throw 3 or 4 in a game, I can't say you are not at fault at all.
You want to know something fascinating? You know who's actually a relatively good predictor of records?
Who would that be, Zach?
Madden simulators are actually relatively good. When it comes to the Bucs, Madden's done simulations of their seasons the last 6 or 7 years, and they've been a game off, I think, all but one time. Either on the mark or a game off all but one time. I mean, even the 2016 season when the Bucs came out of nowhere and went 9-7, Madden had them going 8-8. So Madden's relatively good at this. And I saw a Madden simulation yesterday that had the Bucs going 9-7. So, we'll see. We'll see. This team could either, meet that or it could be a game off. Maybe they'll go 10-6, 11-5. It'll be close. We'll see. I do think that this team has a floor of probably 8-8 or 9-7, but obviously, things can change in the NFL. We don't know what's going to happen injury-wise, suspension-wise. We don't know who's going to do what or what's going to happen in each game. I mean, for all I know, Teddy Bridgewater lights the freaking world on fire. And McCaffrey and the Panthers ride their way to 11-5, even though I think they're in the middle of a rebuild. We don't know. The NFL is a weird league that changes year to year. So, we can sit there and talk about, we think the Bucs will be this, and this all we want. But truth is, nobody really knows. But when you look at the schedule on paper, based on what we know from last year and what we know about what these teams have done in this offseason, it sets up favorably for the Bucs to start the year fast. And even on the backside of the schedule, they play Carolina again. They play the Rams at home, who the Rams regressed last year, and the Bucs even beat them on the road. They play a Minnesota team that lost some key pieces on the defensive side of the ball, who are beatable. They play Atlanta, who's beatable. Twice. They play Detroit, who's very beatable. So, you look at the Bucs schedule, I mean, there's some really good marquee matchups on here. The Chiefs, the Packers, obviously the Saints. Minnesota is not a pushover. I think they'll be a little worse, but they're not a pushover. The Rams are not a pushover, but they're beatable. And it's interesting. The Bucs definitely have a very, I guess you could say, I don't want to say the word challenging. I mean, I think it's only I think it's middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule. but there's
Still a
definitely some
respectable
interesting
schedule.
matchups, especially on the quarterback side in this schedule.
I agree, which is why for the Bucs they put their ceiling as, and get this, 13-3, which they've never had in their history. But that's why I put it as best case scenario, as in they're able to upset a couple of teams, do really well at home. I have them being the Panthers twice in that scenario, which normally doesn't always happen. But
It's happened a few times, but it doesn't happen very often that this team is able to sweep anyone, any of the three division rivals in a season. It'd be nice though.
It would be. In the best case scenario, though, it's sweeping both the Panthers and the Falcons.
And the Saints.
No, I have them actually losing to the Saints in New Orleans.
Yeah, listen, I think we can all agree that most likely they're not going to sweep the Saints. If anything, who's more likely to sweep the other? I would say New Orleans is more likely to sweep Tampa. I think they'll probably split, just because before last year the Bucs and Saints had split the previous 4 or 5 seasons. So they usually play each other pretty well. It's usually a close game between the two, a lot of divisional matchups are. And I think obviously with Brady, I think it'll be an improved situation and an improved team. So I do think that more likely than not, I think they're going to end up splitting. But the key to winning this division could be taking out the other. And if one of those two teams is able to sweep the other, I think they'll ride that to a division championship.
I wouldn't be surprised though, just because it just sounds like the Bucs in this type of season. They could go 11-5 and 12-4, and 2 of those losses are both to the Saints.
11-5 and 12-4, or 12-4 might not be enough to win this division. Just because I strongly believe that New Orleans is more than capable of going 13-3 again, like they did last season.
And it's not like they don't do that very often. I think in the last 10 years, I've seen them do it at least 3 times.
Yeah, they did their Super Bowl season. I believe they went 11-5 in 2010 and 2011. 2013 when they made the playoffs, 11-5. 2017 when they made the playoffs, they won the division 11-5. But I believe the last 2 seasons back-to-back, 2018 and 2019, they went 13-3 both seasons. So 3 times in the last 10, 11 years.
I could have sworn the Saints went 13-3 one other time earlier in the decade, though.
Mm-mm.
Well, no time for checking that. I might just have to take your word for it for now, but
they might have been 2011, but I believe they went 11-5 or 12-4. I might be wrong on that, though. It's regardless. I digress.
The only thing that I noticed about the Bucs schedule, though, is the Week 13 bye. I mean, yeah, it's nice having that rest towards the end of the season, but wow, that's a lot of games to play consecutively.
It's their latest bye since Week 14, since they had it in Week 14 in 1990. I'll tell you what, that is another part of the schedule that I love. All right, I love it. I think it's excellent for this team for what they need. I don't think it could have been set up any. I mean, obviously, you could get Week 10 or Week 11. You only got to play 10 games, but what's another 2 games? This rest right there, I'll tell you why it's important. New playoff format for the NFL. Only 1 team per conference gets a bye week, wild card round. Only the 1 seed gets a bye week. And then the other 6 teams, 2 seed through 7 seed, have to play wild card weekend. So only 1 team gets that rest. However, with such a late bye week, the Bucs get that late rest. They set themselves up to finish the year strong with their final 4 games, and they're going to go into the playoffs more rested than, say, a team that had their bye week in week 6 or 7 or 8 that doesn't get that bye week in the first round of the playoffs. And if the Bucs, obviously the expectations, I believe, should be playoffs. I'm not sure they're going to win the division just because of how good New Orleans is. In fact, I would say that New Orleans is probably more likely to win the division. So the Bucs could be a wild card. We don't know. On the off chance they do win the division, are we sure they're really going to be a 1 seed? I mean, are they really about to sit there and finish better than San Francisco? Are they going to finish better than Green Bay? We don't know. I'm not sure the odds of them finishing as a 1 seed is very likely. But the NFL is a weird league. We don't know. But them having that bye week so late really sets them up favorably to be rested going into the playoffs compared to some other teams that wouldn't have that advantage. So I think week 13, if this team lives up to the hype and lives up to the expectations that are set for them, they are able to make a run at the playoffs. Having that bye week late is going to be big for them.
You know, Zach, once you explain that, it does actually make a lot more sense. I think the Bucs could benefit from that late season rest. And I know it's not like they're preparing for any big opponents. The Chiefs are right before the bye week. So maybe in theory, if you put the bye week 1 week before, you're a little more rested before playing defending Super Bowl champions when they just had Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But that's not how it worked. So let's do it.
Yeah, the bye week is sandwiched in between home matchups against Kansas City and Minnesota. So not exactly favorable on either end. You're playing two good football teams. One of them is the Super Bowl champion on the front end. But you play with the cards you're dealt, and the Bucs are just going to have to deal with it and do what they can to win. That's just the situation. That's just the reality of it. So they're going to do what they have to. But something else I think that we need to talk about, Harrison, that's really that's a little bit different with this Bucs schedule this year. 5 primetime games. 5.
Absolutely. 2 Monday Night Football, 2 Sunday Night Football, and 1 Thursday Night Football. 5
don't forget
games for the Bucs.
4 other games that are 4:30 starts. And there's one game against Detroit week 16 that's up in the air right now. It could be a Saturday game, and it could be a Saturday night game in that scenario. So you might be looking at 6 primetime. We don't know yet. We won't find out till later in the season. We'll see where it's flexed in that spot. But could be a Saturday game. So very interesting that the Bucs, as of right now, only have 6 1:00 games this year. When was the last time something like that happened? Usually they're playing 13 or 14 games of their season at 1:00.
Listen, I read somewhere that before this year, the Bucs had 15 primetime games total in like 17 seasons, or it might have been 17 primetime games in 15 years.
Some ridiculous.
Both those numbers were sprinkled in either or order. It's just since they've won the Super Bowl, they haven't been worthy of primetime games. And I mean,
not at all.
They wouldn't have gotten it this year either without Tom Brady and Gronk. But listen, they went out, they got names, boosted the team. I thought the draft was an A- effort. Fantastic. They earned those primetime spots.
Well, let's be honest. What is the NFL about in terms of making their money? And what are they? What drives, the teams that make primetime? Names, stars. You don't get on TV if you don't have anyone that's worthy of putting you on TV. Before this, the Bucs didn't have names that validated putting them on Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, or anything like that more than, once a year. And typically it was a Thursday nighter. All right, I love Levante David. He deserves more recognition. I love Devin White. I love JPP. Love Shaq Barrett. Before this year, I mean, you only knew it, JPP and Levante. You didn't know a lot of the guys on the defense. Jameis Winston was an up-and-down quarterback there was no star power there. I mean, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are great receivers, but Evans, you don't have a lot of star players. You just didn't. They went out and they did what they had to do. Now granted, some players also panned out. Devin White was a great rookie last year. Shaq Barrett led the league in sacks. But they got Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time. They dragged Rob Gronkowski out of retirement. He's arguably the greatest tight end of all time. The fact of the matter is they went out and they got these star players, and now all of a sudden they're worthy of the national spotlight. But I think there's something that needs to be said about them being on all these primetime games, and I think it's interesting. While everyone loves it, and it's great that the Bucs can get recognition, there's also a flip side, and that's if they flop in typical Bucs fashion, now
it's prime time.
The entire country is watching. And that could definitely it could be a Cleveland Browns effect, like last year where everyone thought the Browns were going to be the greatest things in sliced bread. They got scheduled 4 or 5 times on primetime, and they flopped in front of the country.
It wasn't fun to watch, and I'm not going to lie. And I've said this before on SS Tampa Bay. I was on the Browns winning train. I had them going 10-6, and boy was I wrong. I think the Bucs may have done some homework on that because they boosted the O-line a bit, and man, did those Browns have the worst O-line I've ever seen I think Baker Mayfield was sacked more than anybody in the NFL or was close to it.
Yeah. I was never on that Browns hype train, and there was only one reason why, and his name was Freddie Kitchens. And quite frankly, I just didn't know how someone who previously, before becoming a head coach, had half a season of experience as a coordinator in the NFL, and before that was nothing more than a position coach. I just didn't know how that would translate. And I wasn't necessarily sure that that would translate very well. But there's a giant glaring difference here between this year's Bucs and last year's Browns, and that's coaching. Look at this coaching staff compared to to last year's Browns. Bruce Arians, two-time Coach of the Year. Todd Bowles, incredible defense coordinator who made huge strides with this defense last season. Byron Leftwich, who proved himself to be a pretty competent offensive play caller and offensive coordinator. I mean, this was the number 3 offense in the NFL, number 1 passing. And that's with all the turnovers. Number 3 in points per game with all those turnovers. Imagine what's going to happen when Brady doesn't turn the ball over, 30 times, 35 times like Jameis Winston did. So, I mean, I think he proved himself to be a decent play caller. There's great position coaches that have been coordinators. Harold Goodwin is on this team. I mean, even Tom Moore, the old offense coordinator for Peyton Manning for the longest time. This year's a quarterback's, assistant. He's there. There's a coaching assistant. He doesn't have any. I don't think he's got a specific title, but he's a quarterback's quality control. I don't know what they gave him, but he's there to help with the quarterbacks. There's a lot of great coaches on this staff that just wasn't there at Cleveland's disposal last year. And also, Tom Brady's better than Baker Mayfield, so that's reason number 2, that this year's Bucs is not last year's Browns.
Yeah, and they also still did some similar moves to the Browns. Like they got another big name receiver, but Gronk is better than OBJ and Jarvis Landry combined 3 times over.
And the Bucs already have established receivers in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They've got Braid, they've got OJ. They've got players that have already been here. Like the Browns, sure, they got a couple of big names last year, and it was fun. They added Kareem Hunt. Who only played half a season. They added OBJ. They added players on the defensive side of the ball. The Bucs didn't touch their roster, really. All they did was swap Jameis for Brady and say, hey, Gronk, you want to be added to our roster? They didn't replace OJ. They didn't replace Brady. They just added. They didn't do anything to the roster. Defensive side of the ball remains completely intact. Same defense that came out there balled out the last 6 weeks.
You have to give the Bucs credit, too. They maintained the entire front 7, added a safety in Antoine Winfield, got another wide receiver. All it was adding. They subtracted nobody.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they subtracted Peyton Barber, but does that really count?
And let's be honest. You talk about Odell Beckham, and yeah, he's a big name. I was never a fan of Odell Beckham back when he was with the Giants. Sure, he's wildly talented, but he has a history of injuries. And last time I checked, hasn't he had locker room issues before? Wasn't he a headache with the Giants? Why the hell do you want him with the Browns? What's going to change? I mean, I don't know how much of a headache he was, but I mean, in the locker room, I don't really know. But I mean, wasn't this guy, in trade rumors already after 1 season with the Browns? Why is that?
He was a prima donna. We knew that. But I think the Browns had that fantasy in their head. You reunite 2 LSU receivers with Baker Mayfield, and you can get past all that to go big and make the playoffs. In the Browns' position after going 0-16 and then 7-8-1, I think they were just a little more risk-takey because they really wanted to just show up and say, we are the good Browns. At least the Bucs win 5 games minimum every year.
Well, OBJ, what he's going to do, if he's going to do anything to that locker room, he's going to tear it apart. What are Brady and Gronk going to do? They're going to bring the locker room together. That's what Tom Brady does. That's why he's the greatest of all time. He leads by example. He gets up guys' butts and tells them, you're going to work. This is how we're going to do it. And he's going to have them do it the right way because he's Tom Brady. He's not going to tear that locker room apart. Tom Brady is probably the ultimate teammate. There's no doubt about it. That's how you win 6 Super Bowls. I mean, he's not Odell Beckham. You look at the premier additions from last year's Browns and this year's Bucs, OBJ and Tom Brady, who, Brady, I think it's light and day between this year's Bucs and last year's Browns. I don't think it warrants the same kind of comparison. Just from the fact that it's Brady versus OBJ in terms of key additions and popular additions, and also the coaching staff. It's two completely different factors, and the Bucs come out on top by a landslide in both factors.
I agree. And you know what? If people want to make an argument this team just goes 9-7, that's fine. They haven't played yet. They still have to prove something. But the only source, I'm not going to lie, where I've seen them say, oh, the Bucs are going to be a mess and go like 6-10 is NBC Sports Boston with a really, really sour comments section.
Oh, let's be honest. They're all salty as hell that the Bucs were able to get Brady and Gronk in a Bucs uniform. They're mad that their golden boy after 20 years said, I don't want Belichick anymore. I want a new start. I'm going to go to Tampa, and I'm going to take Gronk with me. And they're all like, Gronk was supposed to, he's retired. Why is he in Tampa? He's in Tampa because he didn't want to play with Belichick.
If it wasn't for Belichick, he would have played last year.
You know why he didn't play last year? He was beat to hell, and he didn't want to play with Belichick. He got tired of the Belichick way. He said, I'm not going to play if it means I got to play with Bill Belichick. Then Brady leaves. All of a sudden, he's like, oh, I can play with my quarterback in Tampa. People love Bruce Arians. Everywhere I hear, it's that he's a player's coach and that he loves his players, yada, yada. He's a hard ass, but he loves his players. And, he's like, I'll go to Tampa. And Belichick's like, fine. You weren't going to play for me. I'll take a 4th-round pick for you. Fine. Go away. Go to Tampa.
And I still think
Patriots fans are like, Gronk, he was supposed to, he's retired. What's he doing in Tampa? Brady's in Tampa. And that's why it's 6-10, according to NBC Sports Boston. That's why.
And I will say, I'll give Belichick credit. It was a smart trade for Gronk. You get a 4th-round pick just to send off the rights to Gronk. They still got something out of it.
Of course, you got something for a player who wasn't supposed to be there, who wasn't going to be there anyway. So I mean, you get something for nothing. It was a good trade in that scenario, but it's also good for the Bucs in that with this in terms of a gamble, you give a 4th-round pick for arguably the greatest tight end of all time. If he returns to form, it's an amazing trade.
It's a steal. You got Gronk for a 4th-round pick, and the worst-case scenario was you still got at least have a 7th-round pick for the chance to have Gronk.
Well, if it doesn't pan out, it's a 1-year contract. The Bucs give a day 3 pick. You wipe your hands clean. You're like, all right, fine. It's very low-risk, high-reward move, and the Bucs did fine. But yeah, Patriots fans are Boston fans. If they're not now Bucs fans, bandwagon galore. They are the saltiest group probably of sports fans in the country. They lost Mookie Betts. They lost David Price. They lost Tom Brady. They lost Gronkowski all in the midst of like 3 months. And oh man, poor Boston fans. They're doing great. They're doing fine.
And we know they're going to be fine. I think the Patriots still find the way to have a winning record. They've been developing a backup QB for a while. Like his name is just not on the top of my head right now, but we'll pull it up.
They got Jarrett Stidham, the old Auburn quarterback, but he's only been there for a year, so we'll see how that pans out. But if there's one thing I'll never do, it's doubt Bill Belichick. I know better than that. So, I still think the Patriots will find their way to probably at a bare minimum 9 wins, probably, maybe more, just because it's Bill Belichick and that man just knows how to win. So we'll see what pans out. But yeah. Boston, the people up in Boston seem to think that Tom and Gronk are not going to work out here. I think that's more them not wanting them to work out here than more so than they actually think it won't work out here. Because even if Brady and Gronk produce at like 80% of what they used to, that's still way better than anything the Bucs have had in years. Along with the talent on this roster around them, it should be fine.
Tell me about it. Like in the Bucs, they don't exactly even want 100% of Brady, or they're not hoping for it. They know.
Oh, don't get me wrong, they're hoping for it.
Oh, they're hoping.
I just don't necessarily know if that's the expectation.
What I mean is, they know even if they get 75% of Brady, they'll be happy because listen, those Patriots.
They'll still be 10 times better what they got from Jameis.
Yeah, exactly. But the Patriots last year went 12-4, even with Brady being on his spiral downward and relying on the defense. The big thing for the Bucs was getting a quarterback that one could be a leader, improve the culture of the clubhouse, and limit the heck out of turnovers. And I mean 22 less interceptions is a lot more valuable than those 8 less touchdowns. Let me tell you.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not exactly expecting this year's Bucs defense to be like last year's Patriots. Last year's Patriots defense was unbelievably good, probably the best defense in the NFL. It was a
Not as good
great
as that rush
defense. Stephon Gilmore, Defense Player of the Year, leading the way. It was a great defense, and they really did carry that team. But I mean, I think Brady won't have to rely on his defense nearly as much as he did last year because he's going to have this thing called weapons around him. He's got Gronk back. He's got Mike. He's got Chris Godwin. He's got OJ. He's got Brady. He's got guys to throw to who know how to get open and know how to make plays. So he will be able to move the ball and score more points than he did last year with those Patriots. At least that's the expectation. So that the burden's not all on the Bucs defense, but I expect them to perform also. You got one of the best front sevens in the NFL last year. Especially when JPP returned. You got a secondary that's young but started coming together at the end of the year. So the expectation is, yes, this offense will perform, but the defense should be able to carry the load a bit also. Because of the way that they finished last year and the fact that they were able to keep the defense intact, keep them together.
Yeah, and I'll leave it on this note before we move on to our next topic, Zach. We know the history of the Bucs doesn't have to do with good quarterbacks, but the bright side of their history is defense. When the Bucs have a good defense, the Bucs are a good team. The front seven showed last year they're on the way up. Best front seven. I don't care if the Patriots had a good defense last year. The Bucs had the best front seven, in my opinion. And I think this year when they boost the secondary, they're on the way up. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but you know what I mean. Good defense means a good Bucs team, and that's my expectation for 2020. And you know what? One thing we know about the Bucs, though, and the rest of the NFL is they plan to play their season as normal later in the year. But want to know who is not? Major League Baseball. And we have an idea of how they'll be playing it actually from a leak over the weekend.
Yeah, we've this week's been especially for MLB fans, but for sports fans in general, has been a really good one. All right, because with the MLB leading the way, it looks like we're gonna have some baseball really soon, Harrison. I'll let you explain to everyone what exactly the format is gonna look like here. So take it away with that.
Yes, Zach. But one thing I want to start off with first, I hope everyone's been watching the KBO League. I actually stayed up at 1 a.m. for one of the games. I know you might have watched a few innings before.
Yeah, I lost a bet. I bet my brother a soda on the Samsung Lions versus the DC Dinos. And Samsung Lions, if y'all are listening to this, let me tell y'all, you are a disappointment. Who gets shut out 4-0 on opening day? You lost me a Polar Pop. Bums.
Listen, you name your team the Lions. What did you expect?
Yeah, I guess. It's my mistake for putting my faith in a team named the Lions. That's my fault.
Those DC Dinos, though. Instant fan. Their mascot is amazing. His name is Swole Daddy.
Swole Daddy?
Swole Daddy. It looks like the good dinosaur from the Disney Pixar movie took a needle, gave himself steroids, and now he's Swole Daddy. Actually, I know people can't see this because it's a podcast. You can Google it yourself while we're on here. But I gotta show this to Zach right now. Literally, the whole thing is the internet's fallen in love with Swole Daddy. This is him right here.
Oh my God. Wow.
Actually,
I bet on the wrong team. I should have went with the Dinos. Swole Daddy.
Yeah, actually, I'm not going to lie. This might be the first time.
NC Dinos, not DC Dinos. That's my mistake.
NC Dinos. You know what? I think for the first time ever, I'll probably include this part as a video just as so people can see it. I mean, it's on YouTube anyway. So
everyone look up Swole Daddy NC Dinos. It's pretty great. And that's a nice mascot. I see what you mean by the good dinosaur from Disney with, biceps.
Right? He even has like the shoulders and then his neck just gets really tall.
Oy vey. All right. Well, we digress. Let's move on to the MLB. Let's talk about it.
Right. Of course. I just had to point out the KBO, give them a shout out for being live sports in the middle of a pandemic. You guys are doing great out there. We love you.
We stay up till 1 a.m. for you, so don't disappoint and lose me a Polar Pop again.
I assure you that will not be an issue anymore, Zach.
As long as I don't
for
bet
Major
on
League
it.
Baseball, this has been reported on by CBS Sports, New York Post, Ken Rosenthal, all the big names. The Major League Baseball owners will probably vote and submit a plan to the Players Association by Tuesday. For those who wonder dates, it's May 12th. This meeting will be tomorrow, May 11th. And here is what has been leaked so far. The season will be about 80 or so games, between 78 and 82. There are some owners still holding out for 100 games. And you know what? Personally, I'll take that and run with it. But it's not seeming that likely.
My thing is, you can sit there and hold out for 100 games. Just give us baseball with some kind of parameters. I would take 60 games at this point. Give me something. I'll take 80. It's fine. Give me 80. Keep going.
No, I agree. You know what I mean? I was just saying I would love to have 100 games. I'm holding out hope for that. But if it's just 78 to 82, hopefully that 82 side, I'll take it. You know what I mean? I just want as many.
They got to look out for next season also, though. They got to look out for next season.
They also have, and we talk about this every time, they're worried about the winter and the second waves and all that. That was actually mentioned in the articles too. But we're gonna stay positive this episode. Yeah. We got really emotional last time.
They're trying to squeeze the season in. We get it.
But yeah, the goal is as many home parks as possible. No fans. There's gonna be no fans. It might be an issue. Some teams might just have to suck it up and play in spring training parks. The Blue Jays, for example, they might not be able to play in Canada because the law is if you cross the border, 14 days of quarantine.
Yeah.
And if you do that at the beginning of the season and you play in Dunedin, Florida, and it's no fans anyway, so who cares?
It's easier. It's an MLB regulation park.
Yeah, exactly. And then, listen, it makes travel easier. You play 3 of your teams in Florida. You just go up and down the East Coast in the United States. It works out. And I don't know if the Yankees and the Mets will be able to play in New York. I know the state itself is hoping for it. But listen, they can also.
Yeah, Cuomo seems. We'll see. I mean, I know the New York mayor said that they're holding out hope for sports in the summer. So we'll see. It all depends. Obviously, everything's up in the air, and obviously, the owners might approve this, but we also got to get word from the Players Association, which we'll see. Hopefully, they're all on board. Especially if they're able to play in their home parks. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. I'm sure they want baseball as much as the rest of us. So we'll see what it comes down to, but it seems like Toronto might have to just take one for the team.
Exactly, literally. And there are some reports. Even John Heyman said it might have to be. They are still doing homework on the Arizona hub, the 3-state hub. The majority of these situations lead to something that's not the usual divisions in the American League, National League. But the goal is home ballparks. One, because I think the players are more likely to say yes to it because they can go home into the stadium. They're not stuck in hotels.
They can be with their families.
Most of these, and besides, also, you don't have to worry about hotel staff and all that. Players will gladly go only to home and the ballpark. It means they can be with their and play baseball. They can have stuff delivered to them. They're professional athletes. They can pay for it.
Exactly. And I'm sure, you got, especially at team facilities and things like that for, if I don't know how many teams actually have facilities outside of their ballpark. I don't think the Rays do they? I mean, outside of the Trop, or they just practice at the Trop. I'm sure they have team chefs and all that stuff who feed them and doctors that take care of them, stuff like that. So, I mean, they won't even have to have necessarily food or anything like that delivered to them. I mean, a lot of the time. So,
We'll see. Who knows? Maybe they'll support local businesses by having some top dollar catering brought over for some of the local places. It would be a nice gig, honestly. Now that I say that out loud, I just kind of thought of it when I said it'd be a cool idea if you had some local businesses cater. And you
honestly,
can
promote not too bad.
Social media.
It wouldn't be too shabby. But anyway, that's not the only thing that we got with it, Harrison, though, is the 80 games in the at-home parks. Keep going.
Oh, yes, and this might be the icing on the cake. Well, yes and no, it's icing on the cake.
It's interesting.
They've talked about 2 things. They've mentioned expanded playoff, and they've also mentioned one that's a shorter playoff. So there's that. The expanded one I thought was as many as 14 games, if I've heard. The shortened one makes more sense for this format, though, and trying to squeeze in the season. 17.
I like the new format. I'm not going to lie. It's very NFL-ish, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Actually, exactly. It's the exact same thing as the NFL.
And it'll make more sense when we explain it. 7 teams in the playoff. The
Per
top
conference.
seed gets a bye to the division series. And then there's 6 teams that play in a wild card game. It should be around the best of 3.
It's just one game, or is it just like a series?
They say it's a best of 3.
Best of 3 series.
That's been the
And
rule.
then,
3.
yeah, and then you get 4 teams that move on to the divisional series like it is. So, yeah, it's like the NFL format. You got 7 new playoff format anyway. You got 7 teams. 1 gets a bye to the divisional round. The other 6 play in the wild card. 3 move on. 4 to the divisional series. 2 to the conference championship. 1 to the in this case the World Series. So it's exactly like the NFL. It's kind of familiar. I like it. I think that's honestly probably one of the better, one of the better formats I've heard up to this point.
And it's also just the format that makes the most sense. Yeah, I know it's like as if only one league is going to the playoffs. It's more exclusive, but we're playing less games in general. It's more fitting with the concept of less games and less travel. So I think it's fine for 1 year. It might be that this gets applied next year to the National League and the American League for a 14-team playoff. Now that I say that out loud, that's how it probably will be done. I'll make that.
The MLB, I mean, a lot of these leagues are all about eyeballs. I don't think it's any secret that the MLB is losing popularity to some of the other leagues in the country. I think, a change of pace, like a new playoff format, allowing more teams in and then allowing them to battle it out and giving more teams a chance might excite some people. It'll let more cities, get hyped about their baseball team in the playoffs.
Exactly. And you know what? There's some other things I think they might experiment on. CBS did an article about things that MLB might experiment with during this experimental season. And I kind of narrowed it down personally to the top 3 I think will happen. You have pitch clock, automated umpires, and more double headers.
I'm not a fan of automated umpires.
I'm not a fan of it either, but they're inevitable. I
hope not. I really hope not. There's something about human error and having a person back there that makes it a little more feel like it's real, as opposed to having a robot or automated whatever telling you strike, ball. I don't care for it. I like having a person back there. It makes it feel a little more comfortable. I think makes it feel more real. I don't know.
Yeah, and I will say, even though I think it's inevitable, I have an agreement with you there. After interning with a summer ball team last year, I remember talking to some of the players about automated umpires, and they said they didn't like it either. They like having that relationship built with the umpires during the season, having those conversations saying, hey, the pitch was up here, you called it down, or pitch was down here, you called it up here, stuff like that. And I'm at the point where I'm embracing the inevitable. Oh, I forgot one more, universal DH.
I mean, that's not necessarily significant for teams in the American League, though, because they already deal with the DH. That affects them 9 games a season when they're on the road at a National League ballpark.
True, but it will be a big thing for Major League Baseball if they finally decide on that already. It's been way too long. The last time the National League voted on it was in 1980 and ended up in a stalemate because one of the owners went fishing. But that's a story for another time.
Exactly.
So if you include pitch clock, I think that will be huge. Everyone will have to play like Mark Burley. They're fighting for the sub 2-hour games. I think a big thing is also getting more balls in play. If I were Major League Baseball, I would raise the bottom of the strike zone back above the knee that they lowered in 1996 because you force pitchers to throw up, not throw up as in like vomit, that sounded a little weird. Like you force them to throw higher in the strike zone, forcing players to swing more because as the strike zone's gone down, you've seen more swing and misses farther down. The umpires have actually expanded their strike zone to call more strikeouts. The big thing, pace of play, is balls in play. If you can get the hitters to swing the bat more, and I know home runs are cool, but they get old after a while, and you need more stolen bases, contact, just stuff happening all the time. And I think a pitch clock and raising the bottom of the strike zone would do a lot for that.
Yeah, I mean it's all hearsay. We'll see what the MLB goes forward with. I mean, obviously, once the owners are done talking about it, we will see what the actual pitch looks like to the MLBPA, and we'll see whether or not they approve it. But in terms of the restart plan, the proposal, I like the format. I like what they're going forward with. And we'll see what rule changes or experiments they go with this season. I mean, if you're going to experiment, this is probably the season to do it. It's probably time. I mean, it's going to be a shortened season. You might as well give it a test run, see if you like what you see what you like, what you don't like. This is probably the time to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, like we say, experimental season calls for experimental options. I think a lot of things they stick into this league will carry on afterwards, not the whole season format. I
No,
think
of
it goes
course
back
not.
to American League, National League, and the divisions next year. But like if pitch clock really makes a difference this year, and I think it will be fine because a lot of the younger pitchers used it anyway in the minor leagues,
Right.
that stays. And I think maybe universal DH does too because most people are ready for it.
I think most people are ready for universal DH. I would agree. I know with the American League, I prefer although I will say there's nothing more fun than seeing a pitcher hit a home run. That's kind of neat.
Yeah,
Bartolo Colon hitting a home run a few years ago at 42 years old was one of the craziest things I ever saw, and I loved it.
you also
But
like when
I
Madison
think,
Bumgarner hits home runs.
of course, my SM Bumgarner, but I think universal DH is something that the MLB is ready for. It's certainly something that we're comfortable with in the American League as Rays fans. I mean, games without a DH just seems odd. So we'll see. I think we'll probably see a lot of these things implemented into this experimental season this year with the MLB.
I agree. And, I think it's gonna be a fun season either way. Yeah, it's different, but if it's a really good, memorable season with some good baseball, you're not gonna care. You're only gonna remember the good parts.
I would agree. I mean, I think that obviously, the 2020 MLB season is going to have an asterisk next to it as the shortened season from the coronavirus. But, it could turn out to be something that's really fun for fans, something that's different. And, I think people are definitely ready for any form of sports. I know the UFC fight last night got crazy good reviews just because people were like, finally, live entertainment on TV again. This country's ready for it.
Yeah, and honestly, I was looking forward to the fight until I found out it was $65 and I had no one to split
Yeah.
the cost with. So I looked up the highlights afterwards. Great fights.
Oh, yeah. Which, so we'll see what comes of this. But the MLB is not the only league that's ready to come back. Well, not necessarily ready to come back, but is putting plans in place to come back. The NHL, from what I've read, is down to 2 return to play options that they're really going over. One of them is, we've talked about it before, 16 teams straight to the playoffs. No finishing out the regular season, which from what I've heard in weeks past, the NHL was hell-bent on finishing the regular season. But that does not seem to be the case anymore. I think that in order to preserve next season, I think the NHL is under the realization that they really got to get to play quickly. And the best way to do that is really to kind of get some form of playoffs underway. The next option is to take the top 24 teams. And from what I've read, it is the top 6 teams from each division. And the top 2 teams from each division automatically advance to the playoffs, but they're just fighting over division championship at that point. That's all they're playing for is seeding for a certain amount of games to, I guess, finish out the regular season, but it's not the 11 to 14 that most teams had left. And then they will play each other for the 1 seed in their division. Then the 3 through 6 are all playing each other for the final 2 spots in the playoffs in their division. So for the 3 seed would play the 6 seed, 4 would play 5. In this scenario, for example, the Lightning's division, the Atlantic Division in the Eastern Conference, the Lightning would play the Bruins for the division and for the 1 seed in the division, and I guess a top seed in the Eastern Conference. They would battle it out. The Maple Leafs would play the Sabres 3 versus 6, and then the Panthers would play the Canadiens for the final 2 spots in the playoffs, and that would be incredibly interesting.
It does sound actually really interesting, Zach. If you think about it, it's like it's a playoff, but it's not a playoff yet. So you get that same excitement before the playoff even begins. And it's a good way to improvise and accept the fact that, hey, there's a lot of close standing situations still. Maybe a team or two still have a game in hand. They don't want to get robbed of something or making the playoffs, especially when the two
give them a chance, though. You give them a chance. You give those teams a chance.
But you're still at the same time kind of making that jump to the playoffs, which I like. Yeah. You can't play 8 regular season games and risk ruining next season. And I think that's going to happen anyway, but you can lighten it, like maybe 74 games instead of 68.
Now, that being said, I don't know how you're going to determine the winners. I don't know if it's a one-game playoff or if it's like a best of three where like the higher seed gets home ice for like 2 out of 3. I don't know necessarily. I would say best of 3 probably seems more likely. But it's definitely exciting. The NHL is, they're also kind of taking it from the NFL, from the old playoff format almost in a way. 1 and 2 seed get the bye. In this scenario, top 2 automatically get their bid in the playoffs, and then 3 through 6 battle it out to move on. 3, 6, and then 4 and 5 seeds they move on. They battle it out to see who advances. It's kind of like that. So I hate to bring everything back to the NFL, but that's just what I do. But with the NHL, I think it's definitely probably the best way to approach this in terms of letting teams that were right there on the outside looking in, but maybe had a game or 2 in hand, maybe we're a point or 2 back of a wild card spot. This is probably the best way to limit the amount of games played before you get to the playoffs, and while still letting teams get their legs together and also have that chance to clinch their bid into the playoffs. So I definitely think that the NHL would benefit from that format as opposed to the straight 16 teams, let's go to the postseason, because I think you would probably piss off a few teams doing that and quite a few people. I like this 24-team scenario a lot.
I also think it makes sense too if you do the best of 3 for that first part. You don't have that controversy where, oh, we only played 1 game and off nights and all that. Like, if you do the whole best 2 out of 3 format, there's no argument. Like, listen, someone won 2 out of 3, so be it. They move on to the playoffs. You don't. Bye. See you next year. Better luck next time.
Exactly. It'll be kind of weird though. I'll say this: if you got a team like the Sabres who were on the outside looking in, they really had no chance of making the playoffs. They were probably like 10 points back of like a wild card team like the Islanders or Columbus or something like that, and they really didn't have a chance. And they go and they knock out the Maple Leafs, who were as sure of a thing in the regular format as they were ready to go meet the Bolts in the first round of the playoffs. It was pretty much locked in. If you get the Sabres who go and beat the Leafs 2 out of 3 or something like that, that might stir the pot. You might be playing with fire then a little bit because the Buffalo is going to move on, and people are going to be like, Buffalo wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. All of a sudden they win 2 games, and then that knocks out the 70 previous games that Toronto had to deal with, where they sat there and they way outplayed them, and they were ready to make the playoffs. They had 90 points or whatever compared to Buffalo's 65, and you're going to sit there and let Buffalo in the playoffs. So there's no perfect way to do this, but in terms of letting a majority of the teams, if Toronto's the better team, let them go win 2 out of 3. There's no perfect way to do it, but in terms of letting teams battle it out, teams that were right there on the brink, and it was close, letting them battle it out for that last spot, this is really the best way to go about it, probably.
Yeah, and you know what? Like we already said, if you lose, too bad, so sad. Better luck next time, and it really doesn't even matter how good your regular season record was anyway. We learned that from being the Lightning fans 2 years ago at this point, or last year actually, not 2 years ago. I wish it was farther away than that, or all those times the Maple Leafs were the 2nd seed and they lost to the 3rd seed Bruins. It just doesn't matter. What matters is that you were hot at the right time and you won that series. And I think if you win the series, you win fair and square. It doesn't matter if you won 5 more games in the regular season, because if that's how it worked, they would give the Stanley Cup to the regular season
President's
trophy winner, which is what they would have done in the Challenge Cup era, but that was in the 1880s.
Yeah.
Who cares?
So, I mean, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Teams getting hot at the right time, that's not necessarily what's going to happen here. Especially when you take 3 or 4 months off. These teams have practically had an off season now, and they're going to jump back in and finish out the season. I think that giving these teams a few weeks of practice and a few games to get their skates under them and then hopefully the right teams get into the playoffs. We'll see. It just depends on who wins. As Lightning fans, we don't really got to worry about it because we're lucky enough to be the second team in our division. So we're fine. We're automatically clinched our bid in this scenario. So either way, if the season starts back up, we're in the playoffs. We're good. So love that. Don't got to worry about it. But it's hard. It's hard to see. It's hard to have anything perfect in coming back and without finishing the regular season. But that's just reality. And I think that the 2014 plan is the best way to go. And then we'll see how it works out. I'm hoping we get hockey back soon. I'm hoping we get baseball back soon. And I definitely would be excited to see the Bolts back. No team's going to be hot necessarily, but it's about I guess at that point who's just better. You take all momentum out of it from the end of the regular season. At that point, everyone's starting to know who's better.
I agree. And you know what? In hockey, momentum is everything.
It
matters a lot more than skill, I would argue. And you see it almost every year with teams that weren't supposed to make it anywhere, and they get at least the second round of the conference finals.
I would say the Blues were not nearly as talented or as skilled as of a team as Boston last year, and they ended up winning the Stanley Cup.
Then you have the 8th seed Kings that won in 2012.
8th seed Columbus, who beat the Lightning last year. We don't like to talk about it, but they were not nearly as talented or as skilled as Lightning. But they won Game 1 and carried that momentum the rest of the way through the series. They came back from 3-0 and they carried that all the way.
Exactly. I saw a video a few years ago. They compared momentum to skill. Basketball is the one that's the most skill. Momentum almost just does not matter. The better team will win. Baseball's somewhere in the middle, unless it's the playoffs, and then suddenly momentum is everything like in hockey.
Yeah. The NFL is definitely momentum-based. Skill matters, but, any given Sunday, I think it's more – it definitely matters in between games, but in the midst of the game, if you have momentum, it's going to carry you.
Yeah, like going into the game, I know what you mean. Going into the game, skill matters, but if something goes your way in the game, it completely puts it on its head. Momentum can carry you. And we've seen that in some playoff games. And if some argue, it all depends on how the refs feel that way. That day they swallow their whistles, or if they decide to just keep it in their mouths the whole time and just go.
Yeah. But in the NHL, momentum can carry you through a series. It really can. It can.
Yeah. And you know what? It's going to be really fun when it gets here. But we're going to have to wait a little bit, and I think we'll talk more about it in this next episode. And this is the part, Zach, where I kick you out.
Oh, man. Well, like we said, happy Mother's Day to all mothers. Hope everyone has a great and safe week. And hopefully we'll have better news to report on the MLB. Hopefully we'll have a complete restart plan by next episode. And we'll be looking forward to baseball in June or July. But we'll see. Until Harrison, I'll catch you later, man.
Thank you, Zach. Having you on is always a pleasure, especially when you are the co-guy to SS Tampa Bay Sports. Thank you all again for listening. This is SS Tampa Bay Sports Podcast. I'm Harrison Smadjevitz alongside Zach Seifter. Happy Mother's Day for one more time, and you have a good week.